and quote from the words in Deuteronomy where these words are life. And you say, no, but don't you understand? God's given a new and better covenant. And we quote to them triumphantly from Jeremiah, the 31st chapter. And they, in response, what are they going to tell us? Wait. Look at the verses yourself. It says God's going to put the Torah in our hearts. He's not going to put some new law. He's going to put the Torah in our hearts. What are you talking about? We don't need some different covenant. This is just one where we all keep Torah. And then they begin to point to verses like in Exodus 12 and many other passages about you do this to pass it on to your children and to your children's children. That's what we're doing. We don't need something new and different. We've been doing the same thing for generations. You're the ones that are following some alien religion. You're the ones that are following some weird faith. At a certain point, the issue of the deity of Jesus is going to come up, and maybe you feel pressed, and I'm not going to back down. And you're just going to say, well, Jesus is God, because you're pressed, and you're just going to say it bluntly. And they just quote you, Numbers 23:19, among other passages. God's not a man. We'll deal with all these things in great depth, of course. God's not a man. I remember a rabbi asking me, this conservative rabbi, the one I was friends with in those early years. He said to me, Mike, can God cease to exist? Can God cease to exist? I said, well, it says about him in Psalm 90, from everlasting to everlasting, you're God. So by definition, he's eternal, so he can't cease to exist. And he responded, he said, well, by definition, he can't be a man. He's eternal God, he can't be a man. And then maybe at this point, the rabbi begins to bring up church history. See, I've got to be honest with you. When I read that book that the rabbi gave me as a new believer, it didn't affect me. It didn't even get me to think much. Why? Because the church that I was part of then, the feeling we had is we went straight from our day back to the New Testament. We almost never talked about, quote, church history or great church leaders or this or that. Maybe here and there you'd hear a reference to Spurgeon or Wesley or something. These are more recent guys relatively. 1700s, 1800s. We didn't hear about church history through the centuries. We made a total disconnect. So I read all that, like that's terrible, but we go back to the New Testament. At a certain point you have to say, well, what happened to the community that was, where are they? Doesn't a good tree produce good fruit? Where is it? And maybe they'll begin to take you through the history and the sermons of John Chrysostom in the 4th, 5th centuries. God hates the Jews. Take you through the Crusades and destruction of Jerusalem in July of 1099 when Jews are herded together in the great synagogue in Jerusalem, and it's burned to the ground as the Crusader army marches around it, singing Christ we adore thee, when their uniforms with the crosses emblazoned on them, or the Inquisitions which sought to purge out any type of Jewishness on any level from the church. There was even one pope who was elected pope, and then they found out that he had Jewish blood. And how could it be that a Jew could sit in the throne of St. Peter? That would be like saying, how could it be that an American could sit as the president of the White House? But that's how far they had gotten from remembering that Peter himself was a Jew, as were all the disciples. Maybe you'd respond by saying, yeah, look, I'm sorry to say, but most of that stuff is Catholic, and I'm not Catholic. They'd say, oh, so you're like Protestant and Martin Luther and that kind of thing. Yeah, I'm Protestant. Yeah, and then they begin to quote you. Yeah, Martin Luther, 1523, wrote his lovely little mini book that Jesus Christ was born a Jew, where he reached out to Jewish people, sincerely. And he said, when he broke away from the Catholic Church, he said, boy, the way the church treats the Jews, he said, if I had been a Jew, I'd rather be a pig than a Christian. He called the priests and the bishops, even the popes, coarse blockheads. He said, look, Jesus is a Jew. They're basically the elder brothers and sisters. We're the younger ones. Perhaps we can show them that Jesus was born a Jew, and some of them will come to faith. Well, he was expecting some mass results. He didn't get it. 20 years later, he's old, he's sick. He's been now shown some very ugly literature that the rabbis have written about Jesus, saying that he's illegitimate, that he was born in fornication, that he's burning in hell right now, that he was a magician and a deceiver. All these things come together and produce an explosion in Luther. And he was very venomous towards his opponents. And he wrote, the most famous of these that he wrote in 1543 in those years was concerning the Jews and their lives. You can still get that in neo-Nazi catalogs to this day. He scoped out a 7-fold plan of how to deal with this insufferable burden of the Jews. The very first counsel he gave was that their synagogues and houses of worship should be set on fire, their places of business destroyed. And when Kristallnacht began, which historians consider the actual beginning of the Holocaust, that was November 10th and 11th, I believe, 1938. It was in commemoration, the timing of it was to put it in commemoration of Martin Luther's birthday. And the very first thing they did was set the synagogues on fire and destroy the places of business. They followed Martin Luther's counsel to a T. One historian called Martin Luther the John the Baptist of Adolf Hitler, the one who prepared the way for Hitler. And interestingly, if you'll study it, his writings, the 1543 writings, were not received by his contemporaries. One Latin translator tried to soften some of what he said. The subsequent generations that followed Luther held on to his 1523 writing and officially repudiated it over the centuries. But Hitler picked it up. How do you undo that damage? How do you undo that connection? So you're talking to a religious Jew and you're basically telling him, in his view, in his mentality, deny your faith, deny your solidarity to the God of Israel, cut yourself off from your people, and join an alien religion that has brought more suffering on our people than any other religion. And do willfully, without any pressure, what your forefathers died rather than do. The tradition became well known in Jewish martyrdom called Kiddush Hashem, sanctification of the name, sanctification of the Lord, that a Jew would rather die than convert to Christianity. And to him, it's converting to an alien religion. This is some of what we're up against as we deal with the Jewish people and the gospel. Now remember, the majority of Jews in the world today, the great majority, are not traditional. Many Jews are fairly secular. Many Jews in America you'll deal with, their bigger issue is God, not Yeshua. In other words, just having God in their lives and having a God consciousness. Many do not know their history that well, but if you minister, speak to people in Israel, those with a European background, and those that are religious, this stuff is very real to them, and this is just how they see our world. So just throwing a proof text, that's going to do it? There's a prophecy here. You're never going to explain this one. That's going to overcome all of this. The thing that's interesting is that many anti-missionaries believe that all Christians are fanatically obsessed with the notion of winning Jews. Now look, I travel around the world and speak. And what I have found without exception in almost every nation where I've been, and sometimes I haven't encountered this clearly, I've never found the opposite of it. I have found extraordinary love for Israel, extraordinary love for the Jewish people, tremendous embracing of me with joy as a Jew. I found in obscure parts of India and Africa where I'm the first Jew they've ever met. And they tell me, oh, we have been fasting and praying for Israel and the Jewish people for 20 years. I've been in prayer meetings in Korea where they sob with tears for God's protection of the Jewish people in the land. And yet, in general, I have to encourage